Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, July 27th, 2026, and today we are talking kale, all the whale. I don't know. Anyway, yes, kale, and then a little breakdown of the rules of interplanting. So let's do it. All right, happy Monday, everyone. I hope you all are doing well and had great weekends. Things were calm here relatively with some mild weather, relaxing, all the good stuff. The lettuce we started on Thursday popped this weekend, which is normal and good. Usually with summer lettuce, I either like to start it at the beginning of the week, like on a Monday or Tuesday. That way it's kind of done by a Friday, or start it on a Friday so it's, popping by Monday, so I'm not having to fiddle with it or move it around, i.e. out of our cool area where there's no sunlight so it gets leggy and into our greenhouse. Anyway, if I started on a Friday or on a Monday, I don't have to do that on the weekend. But anyway, last week I started it on a Thursday because we just need our lettuce after our little trip. We're looking at a little likely gap in lettuce production from that trip, from being gone for, 6 days or whatever it was. But that's all right. We took a week off in July. The lettuce will get a week off in August. It's only fair. I did try to bulk it up as much as possible, the lettuce production, before we left, but I just fear my efforts are going to come up a little bit short. It's my first ever mid-summer vacation as a farmer though, so not bad for our first try. A for effort. The gardens are mostly still good to go though, so that feels like a success. Oh, and I wanted to give a quick shout and say that we are thinking of our friends over there in France and Spain going through those wildfires, brutal stuff. And I wish all the farmers over there going through that. I saw it was going up into Bordeaux, and I'm just imagining all those grape growers. It's going to be awful. I'm so sorry for what you all are going through. And then also, a couple weeks ago when we were gone to Colorado, there was also all of the smoke coming down in the United States from the Canadian wildfires. So I hope everybody made it through all that okay. Anyway, if you're in one of those areas or anywhere else, let us know how things are going in your neck of the woods. Upload a 20-second farm video clip to Dropbox or Drive and share that with farmermike@no-tillgrowers.com. Love those, but also that's a good way to let people in the world know what you're going through. Anyway, seeing that it is Monday, let's do a quick crop breakdown. Every Monday this year, we are digging into a single less talked about crop in a series we're calling Planting and Raving. Today, that crop that we're going to cover is fall kale. All right, so I know I did a fall brassica breakdown recently, but there are a few brassicas that I think have such utility on the farm, especially going into the winter, that they deserve a little more attention. And the big one for me is definitely kale. There are a few main reasons for it being such an important crop here. The first is that we eat a lot of kale ourselves all winter. Kale is delicious. Shouts to kale pesto on pizza and sandwiches. That's a big one. So there's that. I just like being able to sneak out into the garden real quick and snag some kale for dinner. Usually a hash. We do a lot of hashes in the winter. Next is that kale planted in the tunnels here in Kentucky Zone 6B in the late summer will produce well into January or even February with protection. Now, it doesn't grow a lot by the time December comes, but it will grow some. And then when the spring returns from Florida, lucky, the kale will start to flower, which kale flowers are pretty good and tasty crop on their own. And lastly, we can sell it. Kale has gained enough popularity over the last decade and a half to now be, relatively easy sell to chefs and juicers and restaurants, all of the above. So which varieties make the most sense? Well, the winter hardy stuff like winter boar and red boar and etc., those are an easy place to start. They have low concentrations of water in the leaves, which makes them less susceptible to the cell walls freezing and thawing and ultimately bursting, meaning they do better in the cold and last longer. The red and white Russian varieties do fine, and I think the flavor there is actually some of the best in the fall, but they are not always as hardy as those curly varieties, and they don't always sell as well. People don't really associate the flat leaf stuff with kale quite as much. Dino, also called lacinato kale, does well for the same reasons those curlier types do, but I do find the yields a little lacking sometimes because with less water in the leaves, the weight disappears a little bit, so that has to be accounted for. You just have to grow more of it or sell it at a higher price for, less poundage. Now, I will grow some baby kale sometimes, which is a good crop and reasonably easy to sell. You just sow it really thick and then you're cutting that. But in general, that is the only type of kale that I'm directly seeding. I'm not directly seeding anything that I plan to just harvest the leaves from. But I do like those baby kales. They're very tasty. They're a little bit harder to sell, but very tasty. Mostly I start kale in 1 or 2 inch blocks in the greenhouse around now for the fall. It's not a hard crop to start in the summer because it does like those warm temperatures for germination, but it can be a little complicated to protect from pests like we talked about for Brussels sprouts and other brassicas. Specifically, things love to crawl or fly fly onto those trays when, you're not looking, or sometimes even when you're just staring straight at them. So I prefer to keep, the trays covered with insect netting and use bottom watering trays to keep the leaves as dry as possible. Basically, I just have the netting over the trays and then I'm just watering from underneath with those bottom watering trays. Then I'm growing those out until they are around 3 to 5 inches tall, at least. That would be like 8 to 12 centimeters. You can plant them smaller or larger than that, just depending on how healthy the plants are. But I shoot for a nice thick tray of healthy green plant starts. For kale, let it go too far and the greens will start to yellow from a lack of nitrogen, and then you're not starting them off on the right foot. They will be screaming for pests as soon as they get into the soil, and you don't want that. The most perfect soil in the world will still take several days to get them happy, so you want them going in as happy as they can be. Anyway, planting and harvesting, well, we will cover that literally and figuratively next. BRB.
Farmer Claire Coleman here from the Winter Growers Podcast. Did you know that I also founded Real Farmer Care, a nonprofit that supports farmer well-being? From my own experiences farming, I knew firsthand that this type of support was missing from ag, so I decided to do something about it. As of today, there are over 500 farmer recipients of a $100 self-care award, with more applying daily. If you'd like to help, each $100 donated supports one new farmer. Visit realfarmercare.com to donate and learn more. Again, that's realfarmercare.com.
All right, planting kale. Let's talk about it. First, planting anything in the summer is a bit of a challenge because nothing loves to go out into the direct sunlight of the hot summer day. So your timing and prep should be well thought out. I prefer to plant in the evening or early in the morning just to give them a chance. And honestly, I will throw shade cloth over most of them most of the time, just, for insurance. On the prep side, you will want to broad fork if there is any compaction there, but not before you add some good compost, a little kelp, some inoculated biochar if you've got it. I like adding amendments and then broad forking so that some of it will get worked deeper into the soil, thus encouraging the roots to dive deeper into the soil to access them, which will help build your carbon levels in there, i.e. your soil organic matter. In general, just get that soil rich and happy because the kale could be there for the next, 6 months or so, especially if you're in a warmer region or growing in a tunnel or really looking forward to those kale flowers. In fact, even if you're not in a tunnel, in a region like ours here in Kentucky, kale can survive the winter and then bloom out heavily in the fall, but it won't thrive, especially once it starts getting, consecutive hard frosts. Those hard frosts will effectively do it in. For me, I like the wider spacing a lot in the fall, especially inside of the tunnel. This is because with so much covering and uncovering, the airflow gets reduced tremendously, which can lead to foliar diseases, which leads to no kale. So, whereas in the spring, I might space my kale at like 12 to 14 inches apart in a grid, that's 30 to 35 centimeters apart. In the fall, again, especially in the tunnel, I go closer to 18 inches apart. That's like 45 centimeters on a grid just to allow for as much space between plants as possible while not, wasting too much space either. That ends up being like 3 rows on our 48-inch beds or 122 centimeter beds instead of say 4 rows like in the spring. But the leaves get bigger and the health keeps it around longer. In the summer, because that's when these things will be going in for the most part, I still like to cover them with insect netting for protection from cabbage moths and flea beetles and the like after I plant them. Anything that would just absolutely love to find a hot kale plant suffering the sunlight. If it's really hot though, sort of like I mentioned in the beginning, you may want to establish the plants with insect netting over top of them, but with shade cloth over top of all of it, like insect netting near the plants with shade cloth sort of suspended above it. And water them really, really well when you plant them. They will love that. Now, in the field, I do like to undersow them with crimson clover after they are several weeks in, if that fits my crop plan. That's a good little cover crop that will just hold that space after the kale sort of dies or slows down. I have not found a perfect timing for this, but if you wait at least until about like 4 weeks before your first frost date to sow the crimson clover and then just sort of like lightly rake it in so it's covered and water it, that timing should be good to go. Another thing that's important to think about is that you can't harvest winter kale like you can spring or even early fall kale because the recovery time is so slow in the winter, meaning once you harvest a plant, the remaining leaves may not size up for another month or two, especially when you get into actual, like winter, like December, when sunlight levels are literally as low as they will get all year and it's cold. So in some ways, if you really want to go all winter with kale and have it in abundance, you need to plant double the amount that you planted in the spring. And now, on the harvesting side, the nice thing about kale is that it is already in storage. What I mean is that it is generally cold hardy enough, especially if you have it in a tunnel, that you can just harvest what you need as you need it, so long as you have it protected from the extreme cold. Winter's catchphrase is that it's not winter growing, it is winter keeping stuff alive. And kale is a prime example of that. I will, for instance, be starting kale this week for the field, and then more kale for the tunnel in a couple weeks. The tunnel kale will go into the ground closer to late September, and I will not harvest it until I absolutely need it. I will let the tunnel kale grow until December, and then start harvesting it slowly because, like I said, it will take a couple months for it to regrow. You don't want to just harvest it and expect it to be ready next week like you could right now. If you harvested kale, you'd probably still, be getting kale for several weeks because we have enough sunlight for the regrowth. But you can have really well loaded up kale plants by the time that winter hits if you treat them well. So it can store for a couple weeks in the cooler after you harvest it if need be, but in the field is where I prefer to store it. In the field, I can usually harvest through until November if I'm covering and uncovering it well, and with the row cover not touching the leaves. Here in Kentucky Zone 6B, it will, if it's touching the leaves, it'll fry the leaves. So that's nice. If you just want to go through November just with a little row cover in a mildly cold climate, you can do that. You'll be delighted with how resilient kale can be, though. Anyway, that's kale. So let me know what I missed, or head over to the No-Till Growers Forum and let our friends over there know what I missed, or just chat with them. That's fine too. Otherwise, we're going to take one last quick break and then get an interplanting question from the Patreon mailbag. Be right back.
Want to harvest seeds adapted to your farm, but you're thinking, look, I have a market farm to run. I'm way too busy weeding and picking tomatoes. I'm Dan Briesbla, and I'm here to tell you that you can grow seed on your farm without losing your mind. On the Seed Farmer podcast and in my book, The Seed Farmer, I share exactly how busy growers make seed crops work alongside a bustling farm business. Find The Seed Farmer wherever you get your books and podcasts. Go grow some seeds.
Hey there, if you have a question that you'd like me to answer here on the show, you can do that. Sign up for one of our Patreon tiers. Go to the latest show thread and put that question in there. That's it. Just because of time and volume, I frankly can't get even an nth of the number of questions that we get. So patreon.com/no-till-growers is the way to get them to me and get them answered. Now, today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Austin at Vital Root Farm, who asks, quote, "Hey Jesse, I'm wondering if you can muse on when a plant benefits from another plant and when it hurts. It's intuitive that generally if one plant shades out another, it's a negative thing for the shaded plant. But what about in the root zone? When are plants mingling with other roots as a benefit to both plants? How do you think about nutrient and water competition versus more roots feeding the soil life, benefiting all involved? My mind goes to crops undersown with another. For example, I can picture one farmer undersowing a tall brassica with a short clover for a living mulch. We just talked about that one. And to have more roots in the soil, while another farmer might try to aggressively cultivate the same crop of clover out from the same situation, thinking of the clover as a weed and competitor to the brassica. Interested to hear your thoughts. Thanks." End quote. Okay, so good question here. And it's actually one that has been on my mind lately because, to be honest with you, I think some people way overthink this. And conversely, other people also way underthink it in believing that all crops will do well together. Now, to be clear, I talk a great deal about interplanting strategies in the Living Soil Handbook that lay out all the things that you can and should think about, from shade to more complex things like root complementarity. But let me lay out a few things that you need to think about when planting crops together. First, light feeders generally go with heavy feeders, meaning you are not typically going to plant broccoli and tomatoes together because those are plants that are pretty hungry crops. And there will be some competition there. One exception might be like in the milpa patch, where we have corn and sunflowers and etc. together that are pretty heavy feeders. But crops in a single row don't necessarily count the same as crops all mixed together. Like you can make a row with a few, corn plants, a tomato plant, a pepper plant or whatever, but you wouldn't want a row of corn up against a row of tomatoes, up against a row of peppers. I mean, that would be a nightmare to harvest for one. But the plants, likewise, the closer they get together and the more they're competing for their space and shade and all those things, they just don't do as well. Like the milpa patch is not just a bunch of crops sown willy-nilly. It's crops in a row, or some, growers use mounds traditionally, but with plenty of space in between those mounds. So effectively, they're not competing as much as they're just kind of growing in a relatively similar area. Which brings us to point 2, space. Things need space to produce decent yields, but also to avoid diseases via airflow. If you pack crops in, will they produce something? Sure. a small something. Crops need some elbow room and some root space to really thrive, especially interplanted crops. So if I was going to interplant lettuce with kale, for instance, I would not pack the kale at a foot apart, like really close, and then try and pack the lettuce in there at 7 inches apart or whatever. I've tried this sort of thing. It doesn't go well. You just don't end up with much of either crop. Instead, I would recommend going closer to 18 inches apart for the kale and then one lettuce plant in the middle of each of the kale grid. So your kale yields should be pretty big and you should get a nice head of lettuce out of that. Next is fertility. If you are packing crops in together, they need to all have their water and nutritional needs met, which means interplanted rows often need slightly more fertility than your average row, especially if you are planting things densely. The ground coverage will help with moisture retention, but modern crops are bred in high nutrient environments with low competition, so that's just kind of what they expect. Another one is indeed shade. You don't want to grow something that is light loving next to something that is tall. My sunflowers and rice situation is a good example of this. The sunflowers near my rice have cast a little bit too much of a shadow on the young rice and slowed it down quite a bit. They aren't in the same bed, but still the shading effect is evident. Something I think people way overthink is the allelopathic stuff, meaning it's, they are a crop suppressant. Unless you are growing a dense bed of sunflowers, it's generally not going to be a problem provided all the other conditions are met. Milpa, again, another good example of this. The shade is going to be a bigger issue for most plants than what's happening below ground. As for things like clover under brassicas or whatever, that's really a matter of timing and forethought. You definitely want to make sure your brassica is, going to thrive and well above the cover crop before you undersow something like crimson clover. If not, the airflow and the shade and the competition will just be a little bit too rough for the cash crop to thrive. I also don't think you need to be too crazy concerned with like root complementarity necessarily, where the roots sit in the soil. I mean, you don't want a bunch of deep-rooted crops next to a bunch of deep-rooted crops, but shallow-rooted crops planted together do fine as long as, again, the other conditions are met, especially water and fertility. And I think that's it. That's all my real thoughts on interplanting for the day. And again, I do a huge breakdown of that, a much more orderly fashion in the Living Soil Handbook. As always, just start small with a few trials here or there and, see how it goes. Otherwise, I think we are done here Monday. Don't forget, No-Till Growers is a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Big thank you to Michelle. Big thank you to the No-Till Growers Board of Directors. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, that we just talked about, at notillgrowers.com to support this work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of July, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Allison. Ooh, spelled very fun. And I'm assuming I'm pronouncing it correctly. Thanks, Allison. Bea in the B, that's fun. And Adam Will. Shouts to all of you, and thank you for signing up. And we show our thanks around here with a random story. This week's random story is going to be about a man named Lance. And Lance was a star athlete in his high school, captain of the hockey team, popular, all the things. But his senior year, he got a head injury, just a hard check right against the wall. And indeed, sadly, it became impossible for him to play hockey anymore, ever again, and any other sport. But on top of that, and part of the reason for it was it gave him a really unique way of seeing the world. How? Well, that is for tomorrow. Sign up spending on the Creature feature. All right. Thanks for watching and or listening. We shall see you then. Bye.
You've imagined the moment, the proposal, the forever together, the second you said yes. Now discover the Tacori ring that makes it unforgettable. Tacori engagement and wedding rings, known for exquisite design, intricate craftsmanship, and breathtaking beauty. You'll find the full Tacori collection at Mervis Diamond Importers. When you're getting engaged or planning your wedding, start at Mervis. When only the finest will do, Mervis is your first and best option. With 500 amazing Tacori designs and the largest selection of excellent diamonds. At Mervis, the diamonds will amaze you. The sparkle of a Mervis diamond will leave you breathless. But that's not all. It's the experience. Total pampering. Guidance from seasoned professionals. The unhurried atmosphere. the no-pressure approach, and the expert education in helping you make the right choice. Mervis means more diamonds, more Takori rings, and more value. No wonder Mervis receives more 5-star reviews than anyone else. Marry the brilliance of a Mervis diamond with a Takori ring. Go to mervisdiamond.com or call 800-HER-LOVE.